Hello and welcome to part 2 of the DarkWing Rigging tutorial. In part 1 we created this skeleton here to be used on the mech, and now we will move on from this point forward. Before we do, there are a couple things that I wanted to take care of. Okay, first of all, I want to move my skeleton. Normally when I work with an armature, I like to keep the armature on a separate layer. That way I can toggle between the armature and the model. It's just part of my regular workflow. Now, as I was preparing for part 2, I noticed some mistakes I made on the rig. So my initial thought was to just redo part 1, and then you'd never know those mistakes had been there in the first place. But then I gave it some other thought, and I feel like I want to show you the mistakes I made in case you make similar mistakes. You know how to deal with them. At least you know what to start looking for. Okay, what first caught my eye is if you look at the rig here. I'm going to switch to that view. If you look here at the length of this, you see that it doesn't match this other side of the hip joint. So there's something not right there. Also, I was looking over the model and I realized I don't even need these joints. Okay? So let's take a look. Let me get rid of the grease pencil. Bring back the Mech model. So what I was thinking was, I guess in my mind, these two components, this box here and this joint here were separate. But as you can see, they actually aren't. They're both part of the same mesh. So I created this bone here for no reason. So let's go into tab mode. Now, as I pointed out initially, these two are different sizes. Why is that? Well, because they're not mirroring each other. Even though I have in the armature options, the x-axis mirror is set to on. Well, they're not mirroring each other because they're not named identically. Or they're not named to complement each other, I should say. If we select this bone and you look down here in the lower left-hand corner of the 3D view, it says we have the armature object selected with hipx.r.002 bone selected. Well, this bone on the other side is named hipjoint01.l. This bone is hipjoint.l, and this bone is hipx.r.001. So during the first video, when I was making these bones and mirroring them, it looks like that I skipped over that or overlooked these 4 bones. So what we're going to do now is first of all take these 2 bones and delete them. Then we'll take this bone, hipjoint.l. That's right. I like that name. It says it's supposed to be named. And like I said in the first tutorial, I try and name them the same as my objects. So this should be hipjoint.r. So let's select this bone, rename it, hipjoint.r. And that clears that up. Okay? Now another thing is that in pose mode, if we take this hip bone, which is basically the base of all of our structure here, and we grab it and move it, you'll notice only the torso and the torso twist section move, which isn't right. All these bones need to be attached correctly. So this bone, remember I said that in tutorial number 1 that you'd think there'd have to be a bone from here to here and from here to here, and there just doesn't need to be. Well, there doesn't need to be. There does not need we do not need a bone there because we can simply select this bone and then the bone that needs to be parented to, hit Control P to parent it and use keep offset. And you can see it imitated that action on the other side. So now when we grab this bone in pose mode and move it, it moves the arms with it. So we're going to repeat that process all throughout the skeleton. So this bone, we'll start at the bottom, is meant to be connected to the ankle bone. So go back into edit mode, select this bone first, select the bone that's going to be the parent lastly, Make sure it's the active object. Control P, keep offset. Then we're going to take this ankle bone. Now really it needs to be connected. The ankle needs to go wherever the leg goes. So we have leg.l. This is leg.l.001. Really it should be ankle.l. This is leg.l.002 and it should be heel joint.l. Again, you can refer back to the objects to see what they're supposed to be named. This should be heel.l. That's foot.l, foot joint.l, leg.l. This should be ankle.r. This should be ankle joint.r, and the last one will be heel.r. Or wait, it's not right. That is heel joint.r. So this bone should be heel joint.r. Heel joint.r. This heel joint.l, heel.l, heel.r, foot.r, foot joint.r, leg.r. Alright, it's good. Knee.r, thigh.r, hip joint.r, and hip joint.l. So now we want to take, well, we've already parented this bone here. So let's parent the ankle bone to the leg bone. Keep offset. Okay, I think that's right. And then we're going to parent the thigh joint to the hip joint here. Keep offset and imitate it on the other side. And finally parent the hip joints to the hip. And keep offset. Okay, so now in pose mode, when we grab the hips, the entire rig moves. Okay, so that's going to be our base bone. When we start moving up the hierarchy of the bones, or it'd probably be correct to say down the hierarchy, then only those bones from that position on are going to move. Okay, rotate, rotate, rotate. Okay, you get the idea. So let's move on. Now that we have all that done, we're in pose mode. Let's save this as part 2. And then we can start parenting our bones. So let's parent this object to this bone. That's the waist to the waist. And we're going to select Control P, and then on this list we're going to select bone because we want it parented to that single bone. Then we can select the torso, shift select the torso bone. Now you notice that it looks like these two bones are selected, and there's a slight variation in the color where the active bone is lighter blue than the other selected bone. But what it's doing is, it seems like Blender, when you select the bone in pose mode, it keeps your last selection in the bucket basically. So it really, I can parent this object to the bone that's active, which down here is indicated as armature with the torso bone active, without worrying about it. It's just showing me that I had made this selection last time and I never canceled it. Or I can just click on torso bone again and it cancels all other selections within that skeleton. Then hit Control P to the bone, and then let's do this wing, shift select. See that bone down there is still selected. Control P to the bone, take the gun, it's going to go here. Control P, this wing here, Control P, and the gun to this bone. Okay, let's take a look at what this is doing. I'm going to turn my gizmo back on. And right now I'm looking at the global axis. I really want to look at it as local because that's showing me the rotation axis as defined by this bone. Okay, so for this gun to rotate the way I want it to, I would have to rotate along the local z-axis. So I hit R and then Z again. And this is how I'm hoping it's going to rotate, which looks pretty good. Okay, let's take a look. So rotate ZZ or R, ZZ. It's in the geometry is intersecting with the top, which I didn't want actually. I was hoping that it would kind of rest here at about 90 degrees, and that would be the firing position of the gun. But let's see what I have it at. I'm going to hit Alt R, and that's going to clear the rotation in pose mode. So if you rotate a bone and then select Alt R, it clears that rotation. So R, Z, Z. Where does it make contact? About there. Okay. It says my rotation is negative 0.3. So let's rotate it the other way. Okay, well if I change it later, then I'll change it to reflect. Basically I will bring this part of the geometry in, make it rounder, I guess. I can always pull this out. Which actually would be a better choice to make. So I moved everything. So first I would have to unparent this. Alt P, clear parent. Do the other side. Alt P, clear parent. Go in front view. I'm going to grab it along the x-axis. Seems like it would be good. So I'm going 0.5625. Now grab this along the x-axis, negative 0.5625. So that way I know they're in the same spot. Then, let me move my cursor here, cursor to selected, so I kind of know where to line up this. Well, actually, I'm going to take the entire bone and line it up with that cursor. Really, I don't have to. I can take the entire bone and move it. Grab along the x-axis 0.05625. No. 0.5625. There. Did it mathematically. Oh, this moved too. And clear the parent on that. And clear the parent on this other wing. Those moved, so I didn't want them to move. So I'll just clear the parent and then they'll snap back to their original location before they were parented to the bone. Okay, so let's parent. I get my bones into pose mode. Let's parent this gun to this bone. And let's do a rotation along the z-axis. That's more like it. That's what I wanted. Of course, you won't have to do any of that moving around because this is the model you're going to be downloading, so it's already set up. So that's what I was looking for. So at the negative 90 degree angle, that's my firing angle, because this here This opening here is where the shells eject. See? Okay. So it can fire when it's down, but it's better to fire it when it's up. All right. Let's hit Alt-R to clear all our transformations. Let me erase all this. And we'll move forward. Now we can parent this gun to this bone. And we can parent our wing again to this bone. And parent this wing to this bone. And let's take a look at this rotation. So if I select this bone, it looks like I want to rotate along the Z-axis, but I can already tell it's off. It should be pointing more towards this direction. So let's see. Let's try it anyway. Rotate, Z, Z. Yeah, look at it. It's all funky. Look at how it lifts off of there. It's not good. So I'm just gonna hit Control Z to undo it, undo that last action. Now let's realign this bone. So really, I need to align it along this joint, basically, for it to rotate correctly. So I'm gonna tab into Edit mode. I'm gonna select this joint. Let's see. How am I going to define this? Okay, I know. I select the wing, tab, select this face, create a new transform orientation along that face. Now when I go into front view, this axis here is the one I want to use for the alignment. Okay? Why did my grease pencil go away? Alright. So, when I select this bone, tab into edit mode, select this joint, basically I want to go from here, this direction, and from here, whoa, nope, not like that, from here in this direction. Alright, so let me unparent this, Alt-P, clear parent. In fact, I'll do the other side while I'm at it. Alt-P, clear parent. Select this bone, tab into edit mode. I'm going to grab this joint and line it up here. It looks funny because it's sitting on top of the part, but let's see how it works. So now if I parent this to this bone, parent the wing to that bone, and I rotate along this, well, let me switch to my local axis, and I rotate Z, Z. That's much better. You can see that it's rotating the way I intended it to rotate. Almost perfect. So that's good. So now I can parent this object to this bone. I believe this one's already parented. Yes. What was it? Y? No. Z. Z. I can use that bone to manipulate that part. I can use this bone to manipulate this part. Okay. Shooting up in the air. If I hit A twice, I select every bone in pose mode on the armature, and I can hit Alt R clears all the rotations, and then Alt G would clear any of the translations if I had moved anything, but I only rotated. So this bone, when I rotate, looks like along the local y-axis. It's going to twist the torso. Okay. And this bone, when I rotate what looks like the local x-axis, is going to cause the entire mech to tilt. Okay? So far so good. Get rid of these lines, those grease pencil lines, and we'll save it. Okay. Now let's move on to the lower torso. We've probably already parented the hips. No, we didn't. So let's go ahead and parent. Well, really, I'm missing a bone, aren't I? Because I still haven't. This is a. Oh, see, this should be called torso twist. Because it's the bone that controls that. And then I need a bone to control the waist, which would be this bone. So I need to extrude yet another bone to control the hips. So this bone should be parented to this bone. Let's clear this. Control P, keep offset. Okay. So this is meant to control the waist, so I'll parent the waist to that bone. And this bone should be called waist. This bone should be called hips. Okay. So when I rotate this bone, that's definitely my waist control. When I rotate this bone, it rotates the lower body for now, so that's definitely my hip bone. So now when I grab this, I grab the hip. This bone should be parented to this bone. I can do keep offset. Yeah, there we go. When I grab it, the entire assembly so far that's parented to our bones moves. Alright. Now let's go down the chain. So we're going to start on this side and make sure that the everything I've set up in the leg functions correctly before we move on, okay? So I'm going to parent this bone, or this object, the hip joint, to that bone. Then I'm going to parent this object, the thigh, to this bone, thigh.L. Then I'm going to parent the knee to this bone, knee.L. I'm going to parent the leg to this bone down here, which is the leg bone. I'm going to parent this dumbbell-shaped joint, the foot joint, to the foot joint bone. Then finally the foot to the foot bone. Okay, this object will be controlled, which is the ankle, what I call the ankle, is going to be controlled by the ankle bone. So I'm going to parent that. I'll show you how that works in just a second. This object will be controlled by this bone, and then the heel will be controlled by this heel bone. So this side is all parented. So the idea here is, specifically with the ankle, is that it's going to rotate along what looks like the local X. Very little. It's just going to add a little action. Okay? More like a shock absorber kind of action. This is going to actually rotate freely because it's a ball joint. So it can pretty much rotate any way. And hopefully that'll compensate for what you'll see in the walk cycle. Sometimes to get the foot to lay flat on the floor, it has to have a point where it gives away. But you'll see that. And then this joint will rotate along, let's see, that doesn't look right. It doesn't look like it's aligned correctly. So let's go to bottom view and take a look. See, what am I looking at? You see how the, since I have the local, the transform orientation set to local, it's looking at the bone itself. In fact, let's take the armature and this foot piece and isolate them. Switch this back to pose mode. Zoom in there. Let's see. Go to top view. So if I hit Control R, I can. Oh, if I go into edit mode and then hit Control R, I can adjust the roll of this bone, which looks like it should be more right there. Oh, I should have unparented it first. Let me do Alt P, clear parent. Let me go back into global view, select this joint as well, switch to local view, grab this again, switch into edit mode. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is Control R, kind of line this up with this joint, tab back into pose mode, and you can see now that that angle is correct. Okay. Now I want to parent that heel to that bone, go back into global view, and then when I rotate along what looks like the local z-axis, that's the rotation I was looking for. That's the action I wanted to see. So this bone is going to rotate freely. This bone technically can rotate freely along that sphere. Okay, the leg bone is going to rotate along the local x-axis. Okay. Now this is going to be the one to watch, because what my intention was, if you remember, this actually has a pipe or a spindle going through the leg joint. So that basically goes through here, from this side all the way to this side. What I'm curious to see is how it rotates. So it's going to rotate along the local X. That's good. Yeah, that looks good. That's what I wanted. I wanted it to look like that bolt was spinning every time this leg moves. Nice. This one's going to rotate along the local x-axis. That looks good. And then finally, this bone is just going to rotate freely in that socket. Okay. So now that we have that all set up correctly, let's do the other side. Okay. Parent all these bones just like we did on the first side. Control P, parent the bone. The leg bone should be parented here. Control P. Select the object, shift select the bone, parent. Select the object, shift select the bone. Make sure your bone is active, then parent it. Object, bone, active, parent to bone. Object, did I do this already? Bone, active, parent to the bone. object to the bone, make sure it's active, parent it to the bone, and then finally the heel. Select the heel bone, make sure it's active, and select parent to the bone. So now when I grab this, lo and behold, the entire mech model moves. So if I move this hip bone, all of it moves. If I twist this, like that, and then I twist this along the local, or rotate this along the local Y, you can see this is starting to come to life. Rotate this along the local X. You can see how the mech is starting to look like it has, you know, a little bit of animation to it. Alright, so let's select all the bones, Alt R, Alt G, and let's Control S to save. So far so good. Okay, so what's next? Well, looks like we can start doing a little IK rigging. Pretty much everything in the upper torso is just going to be manually posed. There's not much up there. These two wings, you know, and they rotate along their local Z. You can kind of position them however you want. So rotate along the Z. See, makes sense. But what would be good is if when we grab the hips and pulled it down, we'd want the legs to kind of stay like they're seated on solid ground. So we're going to have to make an IK setup for those. So we'll start by grabbing this bone, tabbing into edit mode. Oh, let me clear my rotations. Take this leg bone, tab into edit mode, and our IK control is going to be about right here, right where this joint is. Okay? So I'm going to extrude from that bone along the Y-axis, global Y, straightforward. And actually at this point, and you'll see it mirrored it over here. See? There's one on each side. So at this point, I'm going to take all my bones, and I like to work with the bones in B-bone display mode. And I think it's Control-Alt-S allows you to scale them. Yeah, so let me select them all. Control-Alt-S. Scale them down. So they're kind of like they would be in stick mode, with a little thicker. And we can see the joints. So I like to work with them, and you'll see why when we start doing the posing. But basically, these are going to be my IK controls. Okay? And now that we know that all the bones are set up pretty much correctly, we can go to display here and uncheck relationship lines. Just cleans it up for us a little, because it had all those relationship lines going from the bones to their to the object pivot point. And we don't need that. Also, you notice that even though the legs are pointed out, like this, and like this, and the bow-legged, that the IK control is still going to point straight forward. It's not going to matter for what we need it for. We're still going to be able to control the rig with the IK controls. So let's name this bone IK leg.L. Of course, we'll name this one IK underscore leg.R. Alright. And then if we move this, it's still connected, which is no good for our purposes. So we're going to hit Alt-P, clear parent, and you'll see that when we move these bones, it doesn't bring any bones with it, which is fine, although I'm going to leave it in the same spot that it actually was in. And then I'm going to go into pose mode. I'm going to select, make sure my IK control is selected, select my other bone, the bone that I want to control, which I'll call the container bone because it contains the IK resolver in it. And I'm going to hit Control-Shift-C to add constraint with target. And I'm going to add IK inverse kinematics. Okay? Now if I go to the bone modifier panel here, it's bone constraints it's called, I can see that it created an IK constraint in the armature for the bone IK leg.L. Okay? And right now the chain length is 0. So that means infinite. So it goes as far up the chain as it can. Well, really I want it to go up probably 1, 2, maybe 1, 2, maybe 3. So now when I grab this, you can see the blender is resolving the IK chain. Okay, pretty good, right? So if I grab it along the Z-axis here, you can see how it's starting to work. I like it. Let's do the same thing on the other side. Grab this, grab the container bone, and this time I'm just going to hit Shift-I, add an IK to the active bone, which was the last selected, and we did 3. Was it 3? Yes. 3 steps up the chain. 1, 2, 3. And then when we grab this, you can see it's resolving that motion. So if we grab the hip bone, pull it down, see how it's starting to work out. Now the problem is the toes. Let's hit Alt-G. Let's select all. Alt-G, Alt-R, clears everything. Let's save. Okay. What I normally like to do is I go back into edit mode. I take these 2 control bones, hit Control-Alt-S, and scale them up. I like my control bones to be a little bit bigger than my other bones. Okay? So now we need to plant the toes firmly on Mother Earth. So let's take this bone in edit mode, grab the very tip of it, and we're going to extrude along the y-axis. This is going to be our IK control for the feet. Okay? I'm going to select my IK bone, Alt-P to clear the parent. So now I can move it without affecting the rest of the rig. I'm going to do the same thing for the heel. I'm going to extrude along the y-axis. I'm going to select the bone itself, Alt-P, clear the parent. Okay, then I'm going to go into pose mode, select this bone. In fact, let me go into edit mode. We're going to call this one IK underscore foot.L. I'm going to call this one IK underscore foot.R. I'm going to call this bone IK underscore foot dot, oh, this is heel.L. And then finally this bone I'm going to call IK underscore heel.R. Okay, the naming's correct. I want to be sure to get my naming correct. I don't want to make any more mistakes. Okay, so now we're going to make IK constraints by selecting the active bone last. Hit Shift-I, add constraint to active bone, and then this is going to be 2. So it's going to go 1, the bone itself, and then 2, the next level up. Okay, same thing here. We're going to hit Shift-I. Oh, make sure we have the active bone selected. Shift-I to active bone, and 2. And over here, we're going to select this bone, select the active bone, Shift-I to active bone, 2, and then select this bone, select the active bone, Shift-I to active bone, chain length of 2. So, when we grab this, rotated, nothing happens. When we grab it, it's trying to solve the movement of that bone. See how that works? So hopefully when we grab the hip, and I'm going to go tab into edit mode and hit Control-Alt-S and scale this one up so I know it's a controller bone. When we grab this in pose mode, we pull this down, see the feet are trying to stay firmly planted. So we can make the mech jump, jump, jump. Alright. We can make it sit on its own feet. We can move it, rock it a little bit. Careful when you're doing this because you don't want to get it too crazy. We don't have very many ball joints in here. So we can move it up to the sides. And it's looking pretty good. Again, this is a rig meant for posing. So it doesn't have the advanced mechanisms that an animation rig would need, but this is good for our purposes. Let's select all the bones, Alt-R, Alt-G. Make sure the mech is back in its rest position, basically. And we're going to A to deselect all, Control-S to save. Alright, let's take our controller bones, go back into edit mode. These are the IK bones we just set up for the feet. Control-Alt-S, let's make them a little bit bigger than the other bones. Those are my controller bones. And now, what we should do is add a control for the waist. Because right now, when you rotate it, you see it rotates the entire mech. And what we want is for it to rotate along the waist here. So maybe if we select this and uncheck in the bone panel, inherit rotation, maybe that'll give us what we're looking for. It did. So it still controls the entire mesh. But we can rotate it separately. Yeah, that's good. So we could rotate it like that if we wanted to. Rotate this along the local x-axis. Rotate this bone. Is that the correct one? Rotate this along the local x. Then rotate this along the local y. Okay, I'm going to start limiting these rotations because I don't want to forget what's what. So let's take this bone. We'll go to the constraint, add a bone constraint. We're going to limit rotation. And we're going to use the local space. So these local axes that we're looking at right now that we have selected here. We have local selected. So we're looking at the local axes, or basically the axis of this bone in particular. And we only want this bone to ever rotate along the x-axis, which is this one. We never ever want it to rotate along the y-axis, because that's just dumb. Or the z-axis, because that looks broken. Alright, that's not what we intended. So let's go ahead and turn on limit z, minimum 0, maximum 0, basically locking it in place, and limit y, minimum 0, maximum 0. Then we can even limit the x rotation. So now if we hit rotate, doesn't matter which way we turn the mouse cursor, it's only going to rotate along that local x-axis. Okay? And if we look here in the bottom left corner here, you're going to see a readout. So if we rotate and tilt it as far forward as we want, it says that rotation is negative 25.41 degrees. So if we hit limit x and we make, let's see, I believe that would be the minimum. Let's try minimum at negative 25. And let's hit rotate. No, that's the wrong one. That was the backwards one. So it's maximum negative 25. Oh, maximum 25. You can see how it kind of snapped backwards. So now if we hit rotate, it'll only go forward those 25 degrees, which looks like it ended up being a lot. So let's pull this down a little. 20, let's say 19. Okay, and let's rotate it the other way. That's too much. So we're going to go with a negative, looks like a negative 15 or so. Negative 15, okay? So now we've limited it. We've limited our rotation. So now when we hit rotate, it can only go forward so much and backward so much. Really snapping there. Let's go to side view. Only go forward that much, no matter how far we try and rotate it. Only go forward that much. And it can only swing backwards this much. Okay? So we never have to worry about pushing it too far. Okay? Alt R to clear the rotation. And let's set a limit here. Now this is going to be a nice one. This is meant to rotate along that local Y. And I'm going to give it a full 90 degrees of rotation. So I'm going to add a constraint, limit rotation, limit the X to 0. Oh, I see I left it on world space. It needs to be local space. And limit the Z to 0. Then we're going to limit the Y to, let's start with 90 and 90. Alright, that turned out weird. Let's see which one's affecting that. So this one should be negative 90. No? This one's 0? No. Let's see. Set them to 0. And the rotation's correct. That's the correct axis. You get that funky snapping because these are straight up and down bones. When there's no bend in the bone, usually a bend in the bone helps Blender to interpolate what direction it's supposed to go in. But since these bones are straight up and down, it doesn't really have that. That's why you see that snapping, that weird snapping. But I need to figure out how far I want to rotate it. So let's go to top view, rotate, look at our readout. This says it's negative 90, and this says it's negative 90. Well, that's not helpful. So 90 and 90 are the numbers I want. Let's try this at negative 90. 0. So rotate, negative 90. So this one should be 90. So rotate 90, rotate negative 90. That's perfectly sideways. Let's go to negative 72 and a positive 72. Yeah, I think I like that look better. We're going to have to see how the legs end up. What happened here? Looks like this got jinked up. Control R, Control G. What is going on there? Let's clear the parent. Where that should be. Parent it to this bone. That's correct. Do some moving. Still correct. Let's rotate this. Look at that action. Watch the feet there. They're trying to stay on the ground. That's pretty good. Not perfect, but we can mess with it and get it there. You can see how that's meant to work. Okay. So we've dealt with these. You can see how these bones are now green. That means they have a constraint on them. These bones are now yellow. That means they have an IK. They're IK containers, basically. Okay. Let's save it. Getting close to an hour here, so we're going to wrap this up. Alright, what else would we need to do? Would we need to limit this? Rotate this along the local z-axis. 50 degrees and 40 degrees. I mean, we can, why not? So let's add a bone constraint. Limit rotation. Let's limit x to 0, y to 0. Turn on local space, so it's calculating along the correct axis. Let's limit z, what was it, negative 40? Let's see. Yeah, negative 40 is good. And a positive 35. So let's go to top view, rotate. That's a positive 35. I think these values are going to end up being opposite. Limit rotation, X, Y on the local space, forget that. Limit Z, I think this is going to be 35. And this is going to be a negative 40. No? Maybe this will be 40, and this will be a negative 35. Yeah, those are the values. All right. A, Alt R, Alt G. Let's do this bone. Let's go into front view for this one. Okay, so we can see the Y and the X local axis, so we want to limit those to 0, lock them, basically. And then we want to limit the local Z axis, rotation, local space. I think I want to go from 0 to 90 if I'm guessing correct. Oh, nice. So this is going to be limit rotation, local space, X, Y. Z is going to be, now this is going to be 0 to negative 90. Is that correct? No, because it shouldn't have snapped like that. So it's 0 to 90. No? 0 to negative 90. Maybe it's 0 to 90. No, it's not right. Let's see. 0 to negative 90. Okay, so what's going on here? Let's turn this off. Rotate. It says negative 90 degrees. Limit Z. So this should be 90 doesn't work because that goes the wrong way. Maybe this should be 0 and this should be 90. That does nothing at all. It'd be negative 90. There it is. Right, so we're definitely in a badass firing position. We can rotate these and not have to worry about the going too far. It looks like he's about to reload. Alright. Hit Alt R, Alt G. I'm not changing the sizes of these bones because basically you can grab them and move them. These as well. But this is kind of important to note that if I grab it, I'm going to move it around. Okay. Let's see. What else do we need to do? Oh, this control, by grabbing this and grabbing these two. Well, in fact, let's just grab this control and watch. That lifts the leg up. Ready to stomp. Okay. This isn't moving, but if we increase this one more, should move it, which it did. So now we hit Alt G to release that, to reset it, I should say. And you move this up, you can see how that ankle joint moves. And we definitely want to limit that movement. But that's pretty good. We grab all three of these and move them forward. Oh, where are you going? What's that all about? Is that because it's set to local? Yeah, it was. Move them forward. You can see how we're starting to make steps. Move these backwards. Stop. Okay, move these backwards. You see? Starting to look like it's stepping. We're going to have to set the rotation on this so it swings back like that. Something like that. We'll be able to adjust these to flatten the feet, especially in this view. Let's say grab along the Y. See, we can make adjustments to flatten this foot onto the ground. Grab along the Y. That's a good step. We'd have to fix these. Bring this down. Looks like we're going to have to bring it back. Like that. That's okay. It's got a good look to it. We can grab this along the Y. Kind of level it off. Something like this. This as well. Let's see. Grab it along the Y. That's fairly level. Make a good screenshot. Okay, like that. That's what we're really going for. As we move along, you'll see how we can save these poses and use them to transition from one pose to the next and basically create a walk cycle. We'll see that soon. So, in the meantime, that's it for part 2, and we will continue with part 3 in the next section. I'll see you there. Thanks.